Good morning, welcome back. I am coming to you today from the Philmont Training Center in Cimarron, New Mexico. How do I know I'm here? Been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. Right now I'm in the bowl, the ceremonial fire bowl kind of area. And for those of you who have ever been to Philmont, if you were ever in the Boy Scouts, right behind me over my right shoulder is the Tooth of Time. That's the Tooth of Time. One of the big things about taking a Philmont trek is getting to the top of the Tooth of Time. I'm going to put another picture, maybe a better picture of it in a little closer, kind of pop it in here. But I'm coming to you today because I just wanted to do this and say I did it from Philmont. But today this is viewing is going to be, that you're going to be viewing this, is on June 20th. So what happened on this date in history? So it was on this date in 1789 that the tennis court oath was taken. The tennis court oath was a significant pivotal moment in the French Revolution, where the Estates General or the National Assembly had been locked out by the king, and so they assembled on a tennis court and took an oath that they were not going to quit assembling until a constitution was passed. So this was, again, a pivotal moment in the French Revolution. Took place on this date in 1789. On this date in 1837, Queen Victoria ascended to the throne of England. Now, when she ascended, she probably looked like this. Although when most of us see a picture of Queen Victoria, we tend to see something looking more like this, because she was the queen for quite some time, 63 years until 1901, but not quite as long as the current Queen of England, Elizabeth II. On this date in 1893, Lizzie Borden was acquitted of the murder of her father and stepmother in Falls River, Massachusetts. You know the old story, Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her father, etc., etc. Incidentally, funny story, the house where the murder took place in Falls River, Massachusetts is now a bed and breakfast. So if you're looking for that romantic getaway, I highly recommend the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast. On this date in 1948, the TV show Toast of the Town debuted. Toast of the Town, starring or hosted by Ed Sullivan. It was 7 years later, the name of the show was changed to The Ed Sullivan Show, and it went on to air at the same time, same station, same network, same time, until it was taken off the air in 1971. If you're curious, on the first show, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis performed, and Rodgers and Hammerstein themselves showed up to talk about their new musical, South Pacific. In 1973, Juan Perón returned to Argentina as to lead Argentina for the second time with his current wife, Isabella Perón. Now, you may not know Juan Perón, but perhaps you've heard of Juan Perón's second wife, Eva Perón. You know, Evita, Don't Cry for Me, Argentina. That was his second wife. So he had been banished for 18 years and then he came back. In fact, within Argentinian politics, there is still a branch of politics or political movement called the Perón Party or the Peronistas. On this date in 1993, finally, it was Michael Jordan. This was the day that Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls won their third championship, their first three-peat. As you remember, they won it 92, what was it, 91, 92, 93, and then 96, 97, 98, I think it was. Okay, so that was on this date in 1993. Today is Audie Murphy's birthday. Audie Murphy, born on this date in 1925, became the most decorated American soldier in World War II. Went on to a movie career, wrote a biography, or an autobiography, I should say, called To Hell and Back, and then starred in that movie of the same name. He had a movie career for a couple of decades, had some issues with post-traumatic stress disorder, is what we call post-traumatic stress disorder today. Ended up dying in a plane crash in 1971. And finally, today is Bob Vila's birthday. Bob Vila was born on this date in 1946. If you've ever had an old house, you know who Bob Vila is. So happy birthday to Bob Vila. All right, well, today we're going to get back to talking about the Babylonian taunt song. I just like that name, that phrase, the Babylonian taunt song. So we're going to get back to that today. So let's go back to Illinois, where I'm going to talk about that. Welcome back. As you can see, I am back from my little trip to New Mexico. Had a great time. And if you follow me on Facebook, you saw some of the highlights of that experience. But I am back, ready to get back into talking about Isaiah. And today, I'm going to quickly review some of what we've talked about in the past, and then we're going to move into Isaiah chapters 13 and 14, maybe with a little stop in chapter 12 here before we get going. Okay, so a quick review. Isaiah, the book, prophet, Old Testament, major prophet, southern kingdom. Southern kingdom is Judah and Benjamin. Northern kingdom is the other 12 tribes. Isaiah is prophesying at a time when there's great upheaval. There's a series of bad kings, and at the point where we're at now, there's a series of bad kings. There will be one really good king, Hezekiah, later. We'll deal with him in chapters 30. But chapters 1 through 5 of Isaiah are kind of an indictment. Here's what's wrong with the country. Here's all of the things that God has to say about the country. Isaiah chapter 6 was Isaiah's call, Isaiah's commission, so to speak, who will go for us. And Isaiah's commission was brought with the caveat that you will be ever preaching and no one is ever going to believe you. Okay, and this is a passage, that particular passage in Isaiah 6 is mentioned 5 times in the New Testament, where it just talked about the effect of the message that most people aren't going to believe. Isaiah 7 through 9 is Ahaz's test. Okay, Ahaz was given the test. Are you going to trust God or are you going to trust man? And if you remember, we talked about it. Ahaz had this plot where he was going to pay off the Assyrian king. And that, I think it was Tiglath-Pileser, it was the name of the Assyrian king. And he was going to take care of this alliance of Syria and Israel against Judah. And then, 7 through 9, there's a series of discussions of children, and that all came together. And how did that end up? Well, it was a failure on Ahaz's part. Let's just say that Ahaz had the opportunity to trust God or to trust man, and he trusted his own devices. 10 through 12, talking about judgments on other nations. 10 and 11 is specifically talking about Assyria. Now remember, Assyria is the big bad at the time. Assyria is the big threat. And then that series ends in chapter 12 with a hymn. And I talked about this a little bit last week, and I want to start with this, talk about chapter 12 here, because this is another one of Isaiah's really well-known passages here in Isaiah chapter 12. Isaiah chapter 12, verse 1, you will say in that day, again, that day, and I'm going to mention it again as we get into 13 and 14, that day, the day of the Lord, the day of God, God's day. This is a very familiar concept for the Old Testament prophets, where they would talk about this day of judgment. And when they talked about the day of the Lord, it isn't usually a positive thing. It usually involves great judgment, great destruction, and we'll see that that's the case as we get into 13 and 14. But it's after this destruction of Assyria, after God has come in. Isaiah says this hymn in verse 2 of chapter 12, behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. For the Lord God is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. Again, this is another very well-known, another one of Isaiah's greatest hits, so to speak, here. Okay, it's a recurring theme. God is my salvation. Who are you going to trust? Are you going to trust God or are you going to trust man? Okay, this is a recurring theme for Isaiah, recurring theme for the people of Judah. It's a recurring theme for the people of God today. Who are you going to trust here? Okay, God is my salvation, not Assyria. Okay, this is the big lesson for Ahaz at the time. Assyria isn't going to be your refuge. Assyria isn't going to take care of you. Remember, it said Assyria is going to come down as far as the village of Nob, which is just north of Jerusalem. And although they are going to come just short of taking over, eventually Judah is going to fall in 586 BC. It says, I will trust and will not be afraid, for the Lord God is my strength and my song. So Ahaz had this opportunity to trust God, but he chose to trust his political devices instead. Okay? And again, referring to the idea, and we do this today, Even as believers, we know that God is my salvation. He is my strength and my song. Okay, there's a song that the Lord is my strength and my song. I won't sing it for you. But we still tend to put our trust in individuals, especially in the U.S. I remember in the election, in the 1976 presidential election, and I realize I'm showing my age here, but this was about the time that I first really became interested in presidential politics. And Jimmy Carter was running for the presidency against Gerald Ford, as some of you may or may not remember. And Jimmy Carter was the first in a very long time openly evangelical person running for president. Okay, and to this day, I mean, he's written books on faith. He teaches a Sunday school class in Plains, Georgia, that is very well attended, because what's not to like about going to a Sunday school class taught by a former president of the United States? But I remember once seeing a cartoon at the time, because I was going to a Christian school and they just thought this was just the height of sacrilege. Because again, ironically, Jimmy Carter did not have the approval or the support, by and large, of the evangelical community. And there's a whole discussion on how the moral majority came in at this point, and the Christian Coalition and all these guys. But there was this thing, I just remember this kind of cartoon, and it was, JC will save America. Okay, JC, Jimmy Carter, and then this image was of the typical vision we have, or picture we have of Jesus Christ, JC, Jimmy Carter, and this is just hard. But you know what? And it was silly then, and it's silly to now. But we do the same thing. I got to tell you something, folks. Joe Biden is not going to save the United States. Okay, it just isn't going to happen. Okay, newsflash: neither is Donald Trump. Okay, he didn't in the 4 years he was there, and if he comes back, Donald Trump isn't going to save. Neither did Barack Obama or Bill Clinton or George H.W. Bush or George W. Bush or Ronald Reagan or anyone going back as far, Franklin Roosevelt didn't save it. Theodore Roosevelt didn't save it. Abraham Lincoln, George Washington. Okay, our trust is in God. God is my salvation. With joy, verse 3, with joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation. Okay, interesting idea here. I just like this phrase, drawing water from the wells of salvation. This is a continual action. It's kind of, and I think there's a parallel here that you can kind of go back to the Garden of Eden with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of life. Okay, there's a fruit from the tree of life. That this is, not, we never got that far because of the fall, but it's an interesting speculation, and that's all I'm doing here, is to say that this is something that you would have had to continue eating, and this was part of God's plan all along, but Adam and Eve kind of short-circuited that. Okay, but interesting speculation to me, at least. And you will say in that day, give thanks to the Lord, call upon his name, make known his deeds among the people, proclaim that his name is exalted, sing praises to the Lord, for he has done gloriously. Let this be made known in all the earth. Shout and sing for joy, O inhabitant of Zion, for great in your midst is the Holy One of Israel. Again, that Holy One of Israel, that is a very common phrase, not unique, but largely used in the book of Isaiah. Okay, and Isaiah is saying at some point that this victory over Judah's enemies is going to be so great that you're going to understand clearly that there's no explanation but God, and you're going to sing for him here at this point. Okay, that was the hymn. We ended chapter 12, and now chapter 13 forward, I think for the next 20 chapters or so, 15 at least, has a series of oracles. Okay, and an oracle is a statement, it's a speech, it's a condemnation against a nation, another nation. Now there are oracles against Israel, of course, but it's a condemnation. But these are kind of unique, not unique, but what's unusual about these is that these are oracles of Isaiah about what's going to happen to these other nations. Okay, now there's no indication, and here at this point I'm speculating this, but there's no indication that these oracles ever reached Babylon or Assyria or the Medes or the Persians or any of these other ones. So these are oracles against these other nations telling Judah what's going to happen to these other nations. So they're written for the assurance of Judah that someday they're going to get theirs. Okay, so you clear here? So this is what the Lord is saying to Babylon in 13 and 14, but Babylon may not have actually heard this particular. I mean, Babylon heard a lot of others. Don't get me wrong; it wasn't a surprise when they fell. But this is for the Jews, and this is sort of an indication that, hey, what does this say about God? That God keeps His promises. That God is going to follow through on this. So, beginning with verse 1, let's read this here. The oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos saw. Okay, so again, identifying who gave it, that this is an oracle about Babylon. Okay, verse 2. On a bare hill raise a signal. Cry aloud to them. Wave the hand for them to enter the gates of the nobles. I myself have commanded my consecrated one and have summoned my mighty men to execute my anger, my proudly exulting ones. Okay. Now, here in chapter 13, again, as we continue on with these, keep in mind that the book of Isaiah is not necessarily written in a chronological sequence like we might. If this was the first, so like we might have written it, okay, this is the first one he did, this is the second, this is the third, this is the fourth. It isn't like that, okay? It's more a series of thematically arranged, where here now he's going to talk about nations. And I say that because there's a question about the fact that it's Babylon. It's a judgment against Babylon, because Babylon isn't going to become, for lack of a better word, the big bad for another 100 years. Now they're in existence, but it would seem just in a chronological sense to be somewhat odd. Now it could very well be that Isaiah does this particular prophecy later in his life, very late in his life, when Babylon is much more on the horizon. Okay, and that's perfectly fine, but as far as saying, okay, so at the time that we just ended, 7 through 9, when Ahaz is the king, Assyria is the problem, not Babylon. Okay, now some have looked at this and said, well, obviously this is written by someone else, because there's no way Isaiah could have known that. Okay, that's not necessarily the case. I mean, Isaiah could have received this oracle from God, and I believe he did, actually, where he says, this is what's going to happen to Babylon. Babylon is it's another country out there. So, for example, again, let's go back to 1976. In 1976, the big bad in U.S. politics was Russia, was the Soviet Union. Okay? And I remember sitting in a church service in 74 or 75, and the preacher, who was a real end time sort of guy, and if you've ever heard, those who have ears to hear, let them hear, somebody who really comes out on the whole big time, end time sort of sermons, was stating that the communists had vowed that the communist flag would be flying over the U.S. Capitol on July 4th, 1976. Okay, and that was significant because that would have been the 200th, the bicentennial of our country. Well, of course, it didn't happen. Okay, but the big bad was the Soviet Union. Okay, well, now in 2021, the big bad is not the Soviet Union. In fact, I think part of the problem in modern day politics is we can't quite agree on who the big bad is. Is it China? Is it Russia? Is it terrorists? Is it Islam? I mean, in the U.S., we just cannot decide. Depending on who you ask, that will tell you who the big bad is. Okay, but still, if somebody would have said at that point, listen, this is what you guys are going to have to do to deal with China, it would be kind of similar, because now China is a much bigger concern in 2021 to the U.S. than it was in 1976. Okay, and I think perhaps that's what Isaiah is doing here. It's like, okay, Babylon, this is an oracle against Babylon, and you guys need to be aware of this. But here, on a bare hill raise a signal, back to verse 2. Now, this is the second or third time that we've had this imagery where Isaiah says that, listen, God is just going to raise a signal, he's going to flip a switch, and a bunch of his people, these armies that he's going to use, are going to come. And that's essentially what's about to happen here. So the next several verses is just Isaiah describing the mechanism or the logistics of how Babylon is going to fall. On the bare hill, raise a signal, cry aloud to them, wave the hand for them to enter the gates of the nobles. I myself, I the Lord, that is, have commanded my consecrated ones and have summoned my mighty men to execute my anger, my proudly exulting ones. The sound of a tumult is on the mountains as of a great multitude, the sound and of uproar of kingdoms, of nations gathering together. The Lord of hosts is mustering a host for battle. Okay, so again, this is a battle that the Lord is arranging, this downfall of Babylon. They come from a distant land, from the end of the heavens, the Lord and the weapons of his indignation, to destroy the whole land, that is the land of Babylon. Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. Okay, again, here's another reference to this idea of the day of the Lord. Okay, the day of the Lord, it's a common Old Testament expression. Isaiah uses it, Amos, Joel, several others use it. All right, verse 6, wail, for the day of the Lord is near, as destruction from the Almighty it will come. Therefore all hands will be feeble, and every human heart will melt. They will be dismayed. Pangs and agony will seize them, and in anguish, like a woman in labor. They will look aghast at one another, and their faces will be aflame. It's kind of an interesting passage here, they will look aghast at one another, and their faces will be aflame. Is this like out of embarrassment? Are they blushing? Is that what's going on here? But it's just that the tragedy or the extent of it is going to be such that people are going to be quite taken aghast. Verse 9, behold, the day of the Lord comes cruel. Again, talking about what's going to happen to Babylon. Behold, the day of the Lord comes cruel with fierce wrath and fierce anger, to make the land a desolation and to destroy its sinners from it. For the stars of the heavens and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be dark at its rising, and the moon will not shed its light. Interesting thought here. Talk about this here. This passage, verse 10, stars in heaven and their constellations. Okay, why no light? Okay, why is it that there won't be any light? So, of course, on the one hand, it could be that the Lord in excuse me, the Lord will like flip a switch, and so it'll just stop. But I think a more likely explanation is that the destruction will be such, the smoke from the destruction will be such that the light will not shine through, that you will not see the light. You will not see the light of the sun or the moon or the stars or anything. That destruction will be so great. But there's another interesting thing, because later in the next chapter we're going to talk about the stars and just showing, hey, the Lord can cut off, make it so that you can't see the stars even if you want to be one. Okay, but kind of an interesting thought here. Verse 11, I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will put an end to the pomp of the arrogant and lay low the pompous pride of the ruthless. Okay, first in chapter 11 here, or verse 11, where he talks about this evil. This is kind of an interesting thing. What evil is he talking about here? Okay, now obviously you've got the oppression of the nation of Israel. And the nation of Judah, and that's a significant thing. Don't get me wrong, okay? But also you've got, earlier, remember he talked about the different things that God hates. This, the oppression, forgetting the poor, forgetting the fatherless, the widow, okay? All of these, not dealing with those who are oppressed, okay? These are different evils that the Lord is going to come back and judge the nation for. He's going to judge the nation of Babylon for. He's going to judge the nation of Judah and Israel for, and he's going to judge us for these things as well. Okay, so again, this is verse 12. I will make people more rare than fine gold, and mankind than the gold of Ophir. Okay, just kind of referring to this devastating body count. Okay, this devastating body count. Okay, therefore, verse 13, I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken out of its place. That it is just going to be cataclysmic. Okay, is this a nuclear? I don't know, whatever. But it's just cataclysmic, the extent of the damage and the judgment that's going to happen here. The earth will be shaken out of its place, verse 13, at the wrath of the Lord of hosts in the day of his fierce anger. And like a hunted gazelle, or like sheep with none to gather them, each will turn to his own people, each will flee to his own land. Okay, it's like maybe they're talking about the soldiers that are in the nation, or those who have gone to the central city are going to realize, hey, there is nothing here. We need to get back home. We need to just get back home. That's how devastating it's going to be. Whoever is found, those who remain, will be thrust through. Okay, again with the sword, stab. Maybe I should have that machete out here today, kind of. But whoever is found will be thrust through, and whoever is caught will fall by the sword. Their infants will be dashed in pieces before their eyes. Their houses will be plundered, and their wives ravished. Okay, again, this is talking about what's going to happen to the Babylonians by the invading armies that will be used by the Lord. Okay, and again, it's just a great devastation. It's a very humiliating devastation against the people of Babylon for their sin, not necessarily one person's, but for the Babylonian sin. This is what's happening to them. Verse 17, behold, I am stirring up the Medes against them. Okay, now we're bringing in the Medes, which are basically the Persians, the Iranians. Again, if you know Daniel, you know the law of the Medes and the Persians. Okay. I am stirring up the Medes against them, who have no regard for silver and do not delight in gold. Now this is interesting because remember, how was Ahaz going to get Assyria to do his bidding? Well, he was going to buy them off. Okay. And there comes a point where people, you just can't be bought off. You only have so much money. Okay, so or they have so much money that any more isn't going to make a whole lot of difference to them. Now I recognize the old story, and I don't know if it's true or not, but supposedly somebody once asked Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller, how much money is enough, and he said a little bit more. Okay, I don't know whether that's true or not, but you get the point here. But that mentality notwithstanding, there comes a point where you just can't buy somebody off. He or she just has enough money. What are you going to do? Give me more money? I can't spend what I've got. Okay, so that's kind of these are the kind of people that you're not going to be able to buy these people off. They're going to come in and they're going to be doing my bidding. The Lord is saying to Babylon, they're going to be doing my bidding, and you're not going to be able to buy them off. Their bows will slaughter the young men. They will have no mercy on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes will not pity children. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the splendor and pomp of the Chaldeans, will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. And what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah? Again, this is a picture from Genesis 15, 13, 14, 15, somewhere in there. Where Lot had gone to Sodom and Gomorrah, and the Lord is going to judge them, and basically it's fire and brimstone comes, and basically the cities are just completely destroyed. And so Sodom and Gomorrah become pictures throughout the rest of the Old Testament of two things. One, a depth of depravity, okay, and an extent of sin, although the sin of Sodom goes far beyond simply depraved, erotic things, okay? There's other passages where it talks about what they did? They didn't deal with justice. They didn't do the father. They didn't honor the fatherless, the widows, all of that. Okay, so again, same things. It isn't just simply that they were all weird sexual sins. The same kind of sins that a lot of us are accused of or guilty of today. Not again these four where it says learn to do good, and earlier in Isaiah. But it will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. It will never be inhabited or lived in for all generations. No Arab will pitch his tent there. No shepherds will make their flocks lie down there. Okay, this is going to be devastating. But wild animals will lie down there, and their houses will be full of howling creatures. There ostriches will dwell, and their wild goats will dance. It's just going to become a menagerie of animals wandering in and out what used to be a thriving, teeming city. Okay, it's going to be like that. Hyenas will cry in its towers, and jackals in the pleasant palaces. Its time is close at hand, and its days will not be prolonged. So it's going to happen sooner than you think. Okay, it's going to happen sooner than you think, but the Babylonians are going to say, "Oh, we're here for a long time." But in any minute now, in God's perspective, it's going to happen. Okay, verse 14. For the Lord now, verse 1 and 2 here is sort of like a respite for Israel. They say, don't worry, I haven't forgotten Israel. Okay, kind of God, Isaiah coming in and say, don't worry, the Lord hasn't forgotten Israel. Here at verse 1 in chapter 14. For the Lord will have compassion on Jacob and will again choose Israel and will set them in their own land. Again, this return. Okay, so he's looking beyond the exile, where huge numbers of Israelites are taken out of the land, and he's looking back to the return, that remnant there's a remnant that stays and there's a remnant that will return. And he says they will come back into their land. And sojourners will join them. Okay, this is an interesting idea. The sojourners will join them. This is like aliens. So there's going to be Jews that are going to come back, and non-Jews are going to join them. Now, can you look at this and say, this is Isaiah talking about the church. The New Testament church are going to join Israel in its thing. Okay, I think you're probably gone a little bit beyond the text if you think that. I just think that at this point, when this return happens, that the fulfillment of what God intended for Israel all along, to be the people of God and attracting people to God, is going to come to fruition here. Okay, it's clearly a reversal of fortune. It is clearly a turning of the tide here. And the peoples will take them and bring them to their place. And this is, again, as we go into verse 2, it's one of the reasons why I don't think it's verse 2. Why I don't think it's the church here. And the peoples will take them and bring them to their place, and the house of Israel will possess them in the Lord's land as male and female slaves. They will take captive over those who were their captors and rule over those who oppress them. Okay, so given this nature of this reversal of fortune, that these alien sojourners will join them, and Israel taking them as slaves. Okay, this is a problematic passage. I don't have a good explanation for that, given the sensitivities about slavery, but it is clearly, the Lord is saying, look, you guys were being oppressed, and the tide is going to turn, the tables are going to turn, okay, in the future. And in that day, verse 3, when the Lord has given you rest from your pain and turmoil and the hard service with which you were made to serve, you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon. So following here, beginning in verse 4, at the end of verse 4b, as they say, 4b through, I think, verse 21, I want to say, verse 22, is often referred to as the Babylonian taunt song. So what is a taunt song? Okay, now, the taunt song has, it's a fairly technical thing. Okay, it's a fairly technical, has to do with a lot of understanding Hebrew and all of that. But I'm going to kind of try and distill it down to what is a taunt song. Here's what a taunt song is. Basically, it's when you look over the person you defeated and say na 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 na. Okay, technical. It's a technical thing. Okay. Again, it's this taunt song. This is what you're going to say to this king who had been so adamant in taking over, and think this is what you're going to say. And there's 4 stanzas, and this is a Hebrew poem. This song is a Hebrew poem, and some have talked about it, that structurally it's a very well-developed Hebrew poem. Okay, but there's 4 stanzas. Okay, and the 4 stanzas have 4 different views of this king, this Babylonian king, and what you're going to say to the king and to the people of Babylon at the time. So there's a view from the earth, there's a view from heaven, there's a view from the underworld, and then there's a view back from earth again. Okay, so the first stanza of this Babylonian taunt song takes place is in the first 3 verses here, 4b through 8. Okay, and this is just this view from earth, this sense of relief over the fall of Babylon. How the oppressor has ceased, the insolent fury ceased. The Lord has broken the staff of the wicked, the scepter of the ruler that struck the people in wrath with unceasing blows. Okay, that ruled the nations in anger with unrelenting persecution. The whole earth that is at rest and quiet, they break forth into singing. The cypresses rejoice at you. The cedars of Lebanon sang, since you were laid low, talking to this king of Babylon, no woodcutter comes up against us. Okay, they're going to break into singing. The relief is so great. This is kind of like, maybe another example would be like, ding dong, the witch is dead, the wicked witch, witch old witch, the wicked witch. Okay, this is just this. The relief is palpable that Oh, like if you've ever had a situation where there's just something annoying that's happening, there's a loud noise in the background, or you have a bad headache, and then it just abruptly ends, and you go, whoa, it's done. It's over. The noise is gone. The headache is gone. Whatever, okay? There's just this sense of relief is going to happen, okay, as a result of this. So there's this sense of relief. Okay, so that's the first verse. First verse of this poem talks about this sense of relief. The second verse talks about the view from Sheol, view from the grave, view from death, okay? Sheol beneath is stirred up to meet you when you come, talking to this Babylonian king, okay, this Babylonian king. It rouses the shades to greet you, all who are leaders of the earth. It raises from their thrones all who are kings of the nations. Okay, all of them will answer and say to you, you too have become as weak as we. You have become like us. Okay. Your pomp is brought down to Sheol, the sound of your harps. Maggots are laid as a bed beneath you, and worms are your covers. So like the dead are going to see Babylon and its king coming back and thought, wow, we really had great expectations for you, but apparently you're not nearly as big as you thought you were, because now you're down here with us. Hey, look at this. How about that? Okay, so the first stanza is talking about the view of the feeling of relief, the view from the ground. Then there's the view from the underworld. Now the third stanza talks about the view from heaven of the fall of this king of Babylon, beginning with verse 12. How are you fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn? How are you cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low? You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. Okay, so I'm going to work my way up here. Okay. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. Okay, so again, here heaven is looking down on this guy and said, wow, you really had some ambition. Okay, and in fact, this particular passage here, this particular verse is very similar in structure to to Canaanite mythology. Okay, and so Isaiah is looking at this and he's saying, okay, listen, you thought you were going to be just like your Canaanite God, because the word there, God, where he says in verse 13, you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven, and I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. Okay, that is not the normal Hebrew word that is used for God in the Old Testament, whether it's Elohim or Yahweh or any of those. Okay, this is just El, okay, so which is more typically used of a Canaanite God. Okay, so essentially the view from heaven is saying, listen, you thought you were just like one of your Canaanite gods, but ultimately what happened? You died, verse 13 or verse 15, but you are brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. You had some tremendous ambition here. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of the assembly and in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Okay, but what happened? You died. Okay, but you were brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. Okay, so the view from heaven is like, wow, I thought you really had some pretty high ambitions, but no, you failed. Okay, the fourth stanza begins in verse 16. Those who see you will stare at you and ponder over you. Is this the man? Again, this is the view. This fourth stanza, which is verses 16 through 21. Okay, is the view from earth. Okay. Verse 16, those who see you will stare at you and ponder over you. Is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms, who made the world like a desert and overthrew its cities, and who did not let his prisoners go home? All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb, but you are cast out away from your grave like a loathed branch. Okay. Clothed with the slain, those pierced by the sword, who go down to the stones of the pit, like a dead body trampled underfoot. You will not be joined with them in burial, because you have destroyed your land. You have slain your people. Okay, let me finish the thing. May the offspring of evildoers never more be named. Prepare slaughter for his sons because of the guilt of his fathers, lest they rise and possess the earth and fill the face of the world with cities. Okay, so now this is this view from the earth. Again, at the end of the third stanza, you're brought down. Your body is just brought down. You're just dead, and now everybody is just looking at this dead body and going, "Wow, is this the guy? Really? This him? This is it? This is the guy?" And again, in the U.S., we haven't really had that experience of having somebody that, in and of himself or herself, I guess, that instilled such terror. And then we see the dead body and go, wow, is this it? Was this what we were so afraid of? But that's kind of the point here. Is that really, you're just a body. You're just a person. You're just a dead body. Not only are you a dead body, you're not even getting the normal burial. This is how bad it's going to be for you. Okay, you're just not even getting the normal burial. You are cast away from your grave like a loathed branch. Now, this is a tricky phrase. Another way to translate this, one suggestion is like a birth out of season or birth out of order or something along that line. They don't really know exactly what the phrase refers to, because this is like the only time, or maybe one other time, it's used in the Old Testament. Okay, but you're just cast away. You're just not, oh, you're dead. Okay, we don't need you anymore, sort of thing. Clothed with the slain. And it's interesting, verse 20. When Isaiah is finishing up here this condemnation of the Babylonian king, okay, the condemnation is, what is he being judged for? Okay, it's interesting because he's not being judged here in this passage for what he did to Judah or Israel. Okay, see, this is kind of interesting because in verse 20 he says, you will not be joined with them in burial because you have destroyed your land, you have slain your people. Okay, so it's like, oh, well, how can the Lord use these evil kings? How can the Lord use these evil nations? Well, he does, but they're going to get theirs for what they did to their people as well. And here in verse 20, it talks about it. May the offspring of evildoers nevermore be named. Prepare slaughter for his sons because of the guilt of their fathers, lest they rise and possess the earth and fill the face of the world with cities. Okay, so the view from the ground is like, listen, this guy's not much, and we need to just kind of get rid of the people as well. Just get rid of his descendants. Let's just get rid of this whole family. And that's what the view from the ground, from the earth, is going to be of this Babylonian king. Okay, this taunt song. This is like, you weren't really that much. Okay, I mean, it was a relief when you were gone. There's no question about it. But you know what? You went down into death, and they had better aspirations for you, and you failed from heaven. They thought, they're just taunting you, going, I thought you were going to be something, but you're not. And then from the earth, it's like, you know what? You weren't really that big a deal to begin with. Okay, and at the end, we're just going to eliminate you and your family and your line and your rule, and it's all going to be as if it never ever occurred. I will rise up against them, verse 22. Declares the Lord of hosts, and I will cut off from Babylon name and remnant, descendants and posterity, declares the Lord, and I will make it a possession of the hedgehog and pools of water, and I will sweep it with the broom of destruction, declares the Lord of hosts. Okay, so it's like, what is Babylon going to be? It is going to become the possession of hedgehogs. Wow, that's quite a, just sort of like, you're not even, it's just hedgehogs are going to live there. Okay, so this is kind of all of this grand ambition that the king of Babylon had, and it's just going to become a dominion, a place that hedgehogs live, is really all that's going to happen with it. Okay, well, that's the end of the taunt, the Babylonian taunt song. Okay, so we're going to move on into the next passage. Oh wait, there's a question. Yes, what's your question?
Yeah, I have a question here. When you read chapter 14, my Bible translates it a little differently. Let me quote, my Bible says in Isaiah 14:12, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations?" Okay, now this passage translates that as Lucifer. Isn't Isaiah 14:12 and the following verses, isn't this all about the fall of Satan?
All right, well, that is a good question, because many people look at this passage in Isaiah 14 and say, oh, that is dealing with Satan. This is dealing with Satan. And here's why. Here's why that's thought that way. Okay, because the word there in chapter 14, let me find the actual passage here.
the word in chapter 14, verse 12, how you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. Okay. Now, O day star, son of dawn. That phrase, a day star, in Latin, the Latin word for that is Lucifer. Okay, that's what it means. The word means day star. Okay, or son of dawn. Okay, it's just that's what the word means. Okay, it isn't a name. It's just that's what the word means. So, for example, prior to this passage, if you spoke Latin and you looked out at night and you saw the evening star, which some believe was Venus, whichever the actual star is that they're referring to, they wouldn't say, "Oh, look, there's the evening star." They'd say, "Oh, look, there's Lucifer," because that's what it was called. That's just what it was called. Okay. Now, when the New Testament was translated into Latin, into the Vulgate, it was translated to be Lucifer rather than just say day star. Jerome, I believe it is, who did the Vulgate, just said, well, let's just leave it as Lucifer. Okay, and then over time, from that second century, whenever, I'm sorry, I'm missing it right now, when the Vulgate was translated, from that point on, when you read this passage, it said, oh, Lucifer. Now you couple that with a couple of passages in the New Testament where Jesus says, I saw Satan fall, kind of stuff. And because the story is so similar, could this be, that's, and it kind of developed, and Lucifer sort of became a name. Okay. Lucifer is not a name. It's not a personal name. It's not like you would name your kid that or something like that. Okay. It's not a name. It's just what they call the star. Okay. And it's kind of a similar situation where things become that are brand names that become is kind of the opposite of that. So, like aspirin used to be a brand name. Now we just talk about aspirin. Okay. And so people looked at this and said, wow, this is talking about the fall of Satan from heaven. Okay. Now, is it talking about the fall of Satan from heaven? No, it's talking about the view of the fall of the king of Babylon. Can you look at this passage and say this is very similar to how Satan must have fallen and all of that? Yes, you can. Okay, there are similarities, but there are a lot of similarities, and we don't want to go overboard on that. Okay, so Isaiah is not taking this opportunity to say, hey, by the way, here's how Satan fell. Okay, he's talking about this Babylonian king and what God is going to do to him and what the effect of him is going to be. Okay, so again, I know that it's very traditional to look at Isaiah 14 and say, oh, this is clearly talking about the voice of Satan, which is kind of whenever somebody says, something is clearly, usually that's kind of shorthand for it, maybe not quite so much. Okay, so, does it fit some of the details? Yes, it does fit some of the details. Is it a hill worth dying on? No, it's not. Okay, and I'm not minimizing it, but then again, there is other portions in the New Testament where Jesus is referred to as the morning star. Or, there's that song, the lily of the valley, the bright and morning star. He's the fairest of 10,000 to my soul. Well, morning star, Lucifer, same thing. Okay, again, Lucifer, it just means light. It's a great light. Daylight, like when we talk about luminosity, Lucifer, lucid, okay, same Latin root. Okay, so is it talking about Satan? I personally don't think it is, but I think there's a lot of similarities there where you could say it was like this, but I don't think that's what Isaiah is talking about. Okay, so I think we're going to cut it there, and next week we're going to get back into talking about Assyria again and some of the things happening with them. So thank you very much, and we'll talk to you next week.